two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
This is
the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 4th day of November 2019. Boston Red here in the Jerry Pippin. It's an interesting week coming up, no doubt. There are elections in several states, the state of Kentucky, the state of Mississippi, and let's see who else is having elections today. Virginia, yes. Gubernatorial elections in Mississippi and in Kentucky. Legislative elections in Mississippi. We have E.J. Dion from the Washington Post, his article, and we'll tie all of these electoral activities together. First, a little bit of international news. The smog problem or pollution problem in Delhi is to the point that many jobs are closed down in Delhi. They have an odd, even number rationing system for automobiles. And to help the smog and to further complicate it, November is the week that farmers over India burn their crops to prepare for the next year's harvest, for the next year's crops, I should say. So those are some of the problems that you have that are more on a traditional sense, and they now cause problems in the day of extreme climate control. At the same time, in the U.S., in California, in both the north and the south, you have these fires still burning there. In Southern California, you more or less have, there was a BBC correspondent talking about in his area, north of Los Angeles. It's a grass fire, not a forest fire. And in comes DJ Trump, no doubt to get some cheap publicity, talking about cutting off federal funds to California. Terribly outrageous. Now, there has been this axiom, if you clear out the underbrush in the forest, then you would have less forest fires. It's not apparent that that would happen, because the fires caused in California this time around, by and large, are caused by defective equipment from the electrical carriers in California, and also by drying conditions. Normally, this time of year is the rainy season in California. October, some September, October, November, they have the rains. If you get an opportunity to look at the article we posted on Friday Jobber, that program's site, that appears on many of the all of the networks. In fact, has an article by Patty Davis. Patty Davis was the daughter of the former president and governor of California, Ronald Reagan, talking about her childhood, the forest fires there, how her school was burnt to the ground, quite literally. Didn't know about that. Would have been when she was a child, and being in the back of the school bus and seeing the last of that fire. And also her parents, the ranch they own there, her father taking her around and showing her the forest and the little green shoots that would come up. Now, that was the quote-unquote natural way of replacing the forest. After it burned down, then the green shoots would come up, etc., and you'd have a built-in ecosystem there that would take care of that. But in Delhi, there's nothing to take care of it, because you have an overpopulation there. You have the mixture of cars, buses, and various other things, cattle hanging around the area. All of these things bring about additional pollution. And what is happening here, unfortunately for the government in places like Delhi, they have to immediately attend to the situation, because people there, elderly people that have respiratory problems, issues, as they say in the U.S., then they have to either stay in if they have a place to stay in too, and many can't afford air conditioning and humidifiers, etc. So you exacerbate that problem. You fill up your medical centers, and if you don't have an adequate healthcare system, all of these bells start to ring immediately and cause problems. In Iran, we have in Iraq, in Baghdad, other major cities, people are on the move. They are marching. They're blocking roadways. They are protesting the general shabby conditions in terms of the economy, government programs, corruption in particular. And because they are blocking the roads, that in itself is impacting an already most troubled economy. And you have people in Chile that are still on the march, protesting austerity and various right-wing economic conditions put in by the government there in Chile. And you see this in many places in the world. People are fighting against these right-wing economic programs that do not work, period. They only exacerbate the problem of inequality when there's, in many of these nations, there's already economic inequality. We'll talk about the economic situation in the U.S. on our macroeconomics program this week. We'll have job information and other matrix to explain what actually is happening in the U.S. And it is a sordid story, no doubt about that. Numbers man show on many of these other channels, the channels being the RSS feed in general, and you go into places like iHeartRadio. That's where you can find the Patty Davis article. It's Stitcher, you can find it there. Spreaker, the YouTube installment there. We need to put that over, because to fix that, YouTube, for some reason, list our program as entertainment. I'm assuming due to the political nature there of, you could call it some entertainment, grade, not even grade B, grade C and D movies affecting the lives of actually real people is where we're summing this up. We'll get Formula One. They had a race there's several of these races left this year. In Austin, Texas, the British driver Lewis Hamilton is now number one in the Formula One race situation, and he's one short of breaking the record of Mr. Schumacher, if we would put that one in. And also we have the funeral of the late Representative John Conyers Jr. of Detroit. He died at 90 years old, and his funeral will be today. Jesse Jackson, of course, will be there, and it's being held at the same church that they had Aretha Franklin and also Rosa Parks. The difference was, of course, when Rosa Parks was there, and Aretha, the Honorable Louis Farrakhan, was also on the stage. Bill Clinton was on the stage for Aretha's funeral. No indication yet if President Obama will be there or will not be there. But John Conyers is legendary. He was first elected to the Congress in the 60s, in 1965, I believe it was, and he was the longest-serving African-American legislator in the history of the U.S. He was there almost 50 years, and he single-handedly was the voice behind Dr. King's holiday. He founded the Black Caucus. He pushed continuously for national health care, a reparations bill. Any progressive movement, he was at the center of it. Presidential candidate Bernie Sanders remarked about him when he went to the Congress, and that he sought out Representative Conyers and was able to get on some of his committees. He was at one time also the chairman of the Judiciary Committee there, and it was unfortunate he was forced from office in a sort of a similar fashion, not exactly, of Al Franken bringing in external issues there. There had been this harassment charge, but the harassment charge was a minor thing. It should have been settled, as in the case of Al Franken. There was committee structures there to take care of that. We see the same situation, a little bit different, with Katie Hill, the ex-representative who resigned after voting for articles of, not articles, but the impeachment process last week from California, that she was charged with having a relationship with a staffer, was not sustained, but in fact her and the husband that's in a divorce episode now had a relationship with a campaign staffer there, and it was a three-way relationship. Anyway, these things do come out into the public, and there has to be a way of investigating these and not let a rumor go. One other additional thing, we're not spending a lot of time on the quote-unquote Ukraine matter, but the so-called whistleblower, and the whistleblower incidentally is protected by federal law, and there has to be a solution to these Republicans that want to put his name into the public, and that is only so they can attack it. They're attacking the messenger, not the charges, because the charge itself is very, very clear. So what his legal staff has offered to do is let them submit questions, and he will answer them on what we call those interrogatories. They are widely used. They are the most inexpensive way of getting answers from people. Of course, the answers obviously to the questions are performed by attorneys. So there's not to have the deposition which you can defend. But for this process, at this stage of the game, that is adequate. What the so-called whistleblower offered was a second party. It was a second party source that people had informed him of, and it was very accurate. But actually, now they have the original sources of much of those arguments on Ukraine. They are now in the record, and we'll get into that from the Washington Post, a little bit of stonewalling. But first we want to get back to a maxim by Thomas P. Tip O'Neill, and all politics are local. For those who can recall that progressive people run their campaigns, and most people don't talk about that at one time, were run national campaigns to reach issues. And now you went back because you had a big argument by the right for states' rights. And so if you have states' rights, you have only local issues. But now, to the advantage, they've decided to nationalize the campaigns. And for instance, the people that are so-called pro-family, anti-abortion, they are using those issues in the governor's race in Kentucky and also in Mississippi there because of their polling. And they are bringing those issues forward to try to get an extra edge, particularly in very close races. You base that upon so-called social value issues there, and you don't need to talk to those people about the economy. Now, those are very conservative voters, basically speaking, so you can turn them out on an emotional issue. It's sort of like they can address, say, flat earthers, conspiracy theories, any people that are, a majority of them, are basically very, very conservative. Now, they may be anti-government, but understand this whole Trump program was enshrined as an anti-government program, a populist program based upon draining the swamp. What they didn't tell people were they were the swamp, because the swamp involves the lobbyists who represent big business, and they are the representatives of big business. It's called a flippable with political consultants, but it was a national flippable. Let's go to E.J. Dion Jr., columnist for the Post. And we also had one of his columns that was in the Santa Cruz paper. We'll have to bring that back. We will have a special tribute to John Conyers Jr., and we still on All About Sports. We'll have the World Series. We'll get that done. And we'll also get the Bernie Sanders piece up. So we're a little bit behind, but we'll get caught up. Nonetheless, he's writing on the 3rd of November. The former House Speaker, Thomas Tip O'Neill, and his basic, the premise of local politics will be tested on Tuesday in the 3 states. You can make a case that all politics are national now, thanks to DJ Trump and the overreaching issues that transcend state borders. Well, there's no doubt about that. The general fightbacks are there to the case, to the contest gubernatorial in Kentucky and Mississippi. Trump and his party are praying that the national overwhelmed everything else to save the weak Republican nominees. The president campaigned in Mississippi on Friday. He was in Tupelo, the hometown of Elvis Presley, and is scheduled to be in Kentucky on Monday. He hopes to show GOP politicians that when it comes to the base, he's still magic. Well, there's no magic to that. That is their base. This could matter a great deal if the House impeaches him and the Republican senators decide whether to remove him from office. It's kind of like an insurance policy. Anyway, but in Virginia, the battle for control of the state legislature, a national tide would likely lift Democrats, and if Republicans lose one or both chambers, counting their allies with the gun lobby and the opposition to reasonable, and that's a new term that's out now, reasonable firearm restrictions. The National Rifle Association is definitely on the ballot, and of course it's more complicated than that. For example, the issue driving Kentucky Democrat Andy Beshear's strong challenge to an unpopular Blevin are concerns that have worked for Democrats at all levels, healthcare and education being very important. And in these states after states, we go to Oklahoma, we go to Arizona, where it's even been more legislatively intensified with the teachers and education there. And that was one of the things that also defeated boss Walker in Wisconsin. Democrats appeal by echoing messages on guns, again on education being much more important than guns. Guns are, in many of these states, just a cultural thing. Once upon a time, Democrats won in Virginia by sounding like Republicans. Now Republicans are trying to hang on by sounding like Democrats, and this is what we talked about earlier. In Mississippi, yes, Mississippi, Democrats within striking distance of the governorship, by hewing to conservative positions on social issues while running as an economic populist. Well, DJ Trump ran as an economic populist. A tribute to the wide appeal of Mississippi's Democrat Jim Hood. He's the Attorney General, has been running almost neck and neck with somebody named Tate Reeves. Don't have any special polling on that. There hasn't been very much polling, despite the popularity of the incumbent governor who is leaving, Phil Bryant, a natural racist who is term limited, but Hood still is, it should be said, an underdog, and has been willing to go straight at what is usually a Republican strength: tax cuts. Since 2012, Reeves has handed out $765 million in giveaways, mainly to benefit large out-of-state corporations. Who had said when politicians crow about how many times they cut taxes, look at your pocketbook to see how much tax relief you've got. For the Democratic presidential candidates, it's worth pondering that building on Obamacare is increasing their popularity in Republican states. Bashir has been defending the expansion of Medicaid that was done on his father, Steve Bashir. President Bashir, as DJ called him, younger Bashir, argued that Blevins' proposed work requirements would slash access, no doubt they already have, pledged to fight for Medicaid expansion in a hood in Mississippi where Republicans have resisted it, pointing to the danger that the GOP's rejection of federal money has done to rural hospitals. It's closed them down, and that has happened in state after state. In these two Trump strongholds, the question is whether the president can get Republicans to come home, whether the impeachment drive in the House will make it easier. They are tying to Trump this election up. That's Fred Yang, a Democratic pollster working for Bashir. Impeachment seems to have a short-term impact on unifying Republicans. Trump plans to speak at a Blevin rally on the eve of the election. Going through it would be a rush to bet against Trump in a state he carried by 30 points. A Bashir victory would be a sign of the president's weakness. It would be a sign also of the Bashir organizing ability in Kentucky. His father was a governor there 2 terms. Tuesday's election will also test which side of politics is more mobilized. In Virginia, all signs points to a higher Democratic activity. Yang, who is polling in the state Senate races there, points to exclusive use of early voting in contested districts. In Kentucky, the race could be decided by whether voters in more moderate and progressive areas turn out in greater numbers. The early voting, if I recall, that is in Kentucky. Fears of such an imbalance is why Blevin is counting on Trump as a motivator. Ironically, people are like, "Oh, you keep trying to nationalize the race," Blevin told the Post's James Homan. But the people of Kentucky nationalize the race. They care about the impeachment issue. That's according to Blevin. But the state government in Kentucky has really nothing to do with the impeachment issue. Legislative and the governor's race is not till next year. Perhaps this will be enough for him, but when issues are running the Democrats' way, even in Trump states, Republicans have to consider whether the problems they face run even deeper than a profoundly flawed president. Well, in a place where a person is very popular, the president being flawed or not is not the issue. Let's just switch here. We'll stay with the Post and go to this race. Now the real battle for the Democratic nomination begins. This is by Karen Tumbley. The Iowa party's rowdy fall fundraising dinner has a story spot on the presidential campaign. Barack Obama performed very well at this particular dinner. Candidates delivered speeches in which they reach for themes that would inspire and energize. In the days around the dinner, army of their supporters turned downtown Des Moines into a political carnival, showcasing the campaign's abilities and financial strength. Back in 1999 and 2000, the dinner were where Al Gore and then John Kerry delivered their foretaste of how they would beat their insurgent opponents. More memorable of all was the 2007 dinner. That was the one Barack Obama was at, to make people believe seemingly preposterous proportions that an African-American freshman senator with an exotic name could actually have a chance against the Hillary Clinton. And he did. Friday night, Liberty and Justice celebration at the Wells Fargo Arena. That tells you a little bit there. 13,000 people were there. And it was supposed to have 14 contenders. Of course, Beto O'Rourke had dropped out of the race just hours before he was supposed to speak, stunning his backers, of hundreds of whom had flocked in and around around the country and spent days in near freezing drizzle, putting up signs and preparing what they hoped would be a triumphant event. Being a very good speaker, with just 90 days left before the caucuses, they'll be in early February. What happens inside the hall may have told more about the race. Is it shaping up? For starters, it looks like the contest has been pretty polite thus far and has become more and more and more contentious. You have old Joe Lunchbox Biden there is in deeper trouble than his relatively durable national numbers suggest. Biden, who brought along a relatively modest and cheering sector, is losing ground in Iowa. Political veterans say they will not be surprised if he comes in third, even fourth. Those are those infamous 4 or 5 seats out of Iowa. If he comes in third or fourth, that would be a seat that Amy Klobuchar would be on. That would mean she could be perhaps in third place. Anyway, 2 candidates have been on the rise there, Liz Warren and Little Pete from South Bend. Neither of the two mentioned the other by name, but they did as they offered sharp contrast visions of what is going to take to win. The little mayor said building a coalition of progressive moderates and Republicans of conscience who are ready for change. He is running a right-of-center program. We will fight, and we must fight, but I will never allow us to get so wrapped up in the fight that we start to think fighting is the point. The point is what lies on the other side of the fight. Liz Warren was ready with a dismissive retort about those who would run a consultant-driven campaign with some vague idea that we are designed not to offend anyone. That's what we call a Facebook campaign, which is behind the little mayor. Look, anyone who comes on this stage and doesn't understand that we already are in a fight is not a person who's going to win that fight. She says anyone who comes on this stage and tells you that they can make change without a fight is not going to win that fight. There's still time and room in the race for other candidates to striking up ground and make a reasonable showing there. If Biden stumbles, then again she mentions Amy Klobuchar. She's built an organization of following more impressive than her standing in the poll. That sometimes happens. The polls many times don't reflect exactly where you are. Though she spoke late in the evening, she got an enthusiastic response from a more moderate message. I will have plans that I pay for and the deadlines that I can meet because I'm grounded in reality. But as the preseason comes to an end, the choices are becoming clear. For Democrats, the battle within the party has been engaged, and it begins in Iowa. It's interesting here, Tumley didn't mention Bernie Sanders, who has a very good organization in Iowa, has an opportunity to still win Iowa. So we'll be looking to polling there. And a little grisly event in D.C., old DJ Trump attended it. Boos and cheers greeted Trump when he, as he ventured from the friendly campaign rallies to a mixed martial event that was held in New York. Many have called a slaughter. And it was at the Madison Square Garden. We used to have events at Madison Square Garden all the time. The Alderman fighting a championship there, but all he could talk about was Dana White for doing a good job. He used to have these shows at his casino there, so again, it doesn't really matter very much what's going on. It's something like this. He took his seat on the floor. He greeted Roberto Duran. Duran is not, the boxer, is not going to help him with Latino voters. Fake news. This is and the assortment of characters that showed up there. Mark Meadows used to be the chair of the Conservative Caucus. Peter King, he's from right-wing Staten Island, to where for decades he's one of the most prominent types there. The president recently changed his permanent address to Palm Beach, Florida. Now that's very interesting. Not New York anymore. The reception was more mixed than the one he received a week ago when he was booed and Greedy would lock him up. But nonetheless, boos were there. So let's jump over a little bit here. And we'd already gotten that one. Governor's race in 3 states is a test to whether each election is now about Trump. This is Ashland, Kentucky. Andy Beshear is, of course, campaigning there. And a Democratic candidate for governor seems well aware that he didn't have much time to deliver his message before Trump arrived here in an attempt to suffocate it ahead of the election. Well, no doubt Trump has an audience here. My gift to everyone at the end of this campaign is a much shorter speech. He said to his supporters Saturday after one especially abrupt address at a Union Hall here on the banks of the Mississippi River. That's Ashland. He has to get around, there's no doubt about that. And again, he's talking about Jim Hood and Beshear. In the hour-long campaign speech Friday night, Trump rallied against House Democrats, etc., etc. That has been it for a very, very long time. It's a turnout election. There's no doubt about that. There was a 30-point, let's see, in Mississippi, 17 points, not as bad, but Mississippi has the most number of African Americans or followers of O.J. Simpson. And in Louisiana, there's a runoff in November on the 16th there. And again, President gave a major political boost by proving that he can still mobilize religious conservatives and working class voters to the poll, regardless of it. Anyway, yeah, there's no doubt about that. His ability to mobilize those people because they have a self-interest. There are not local races anymore. That's from Brad Chase, a Mississippi Democratic strategist who's been advising Hood. Every doctor's office, every gas station, every barbershop has a TV in it. 8 out of 10 of those in Mississippi are looking at Fox News. And that is a big, big problem because, again, Fox News presents basically the same situation, presenter after presenter, to drive home a message. Both Republicans are here, and in Washington, David Blevin has made major inroads with some voters by aligning himself with Trump while speaking against impeachment. Now, this was the other cornerstone of this impeachment situation. It always causes problems. If the election had been held 2 weeks ago, Beshear would have won by a decent margin. That is from James Comer, the Republican there, who had flirted with a primary challenge against Blevin. The conventional wisdom is, with Donald Trump coming and the energy he brings, the outage the base has over impeachment proceedings, I think it's really going to put a lot of momentum behind Blevin at this time. And this is part of the problem here, again, for this whole impeachment episode and where it turns out. In Northern Kentucky, more than 100 supporters showed up to support Blevin and other GOP candidates in Vanceburg, a small industrial town wedged between the Ohio River and a set of rail tracks. And anyway, they had a prayer there, and anyway, that a lot of what you would call flummery. Literally. Kentucky Democrats, however, remain relatively upbeat that Beshear will prevail on Tuesday despite Blevin's effort to nationalize the contest. This would be an interesting contest, not only looking at the outcome of the contest, but looking at where the votes came from and who voted for whom. Beshear's path to victory relies heavily on turnouts in Louisville and Lexington, which is home to the University of Kentucky, while replicating gains Democrats made nationwide last year in the suburbs outside of Cincinnati. Kentucky borders Ohio. Beshear is backed by an army of teachers, no doubt there, and Gypsy L. Cantrell, the president of the United Steelworkers affiliate in Eastern Kentucky, estimates at least a third of her 1,100 members voted for Trump. She predicted nearly all of them will vote for Beshear this year. Beshear signed the law overturning the state's prevailing wage law. Yeah, no doubt. And these are the things that Bashir has to do. Union members in this state, I can guarantee, have been and will be out in force. Cantrell Radcliffe said, who lives in Pine County. We are boots on the ground. And there, yeah, no doubt there are boots on the ground. The biggest boots on the ground is the teachers union. Bashir spoke to a breakfast gathering sponsored by Democratic Women Club in Pines County. Those traditionally have been sources of strength. His father carried Pine County with 71%. That's Steve Bashir when he ran for governor in 2007. Less than a decade later, Trump won 81% of the vote here. Patsy Wagner, she's president of the Pine County Democratic Women's Club, noted that the group's membership has plunged from 400 in 2012 to 160 today. You can see in the numbers what is going on. And challenges facing, of course, Hood and Bashir. Same challenges facing John Bell Edwards in Louisiana. Poll shows Edwards comfortably ahead before the state's bipartisan jungle primary last month, but he failed to win outright. Well, you got to win 50% in Louisiana, and enough for 30% of the state's registered voters. That is John Cavalon, is founder of the Baton Rouge, and we get this incidentally. We get the and we'll bring this in. JMC Analytics and Polling. He faces somebody, a Republican business type, in November. And according to Kennedy, he's one of the senators in Louisiana. The daily impeachment thing is damaging Edwards. Trump traveled to Monroe, Louisiana on Wednesday to rally on behalf of both Cavillan. He's a Republican, and question that Trump's strategy of trying to nationalize the governor's race could backfire. Well, it could happen there. It depends on how far-reaching people look. And this is one of the problems. The national media has spent a lot of time covering this impeachment situation, and the impeachment issue itself is on Ukraine. That's in foreign policy. People don't really understand that, and this is the problem within itself of this whole impeachment campaign. We have not been that convinced it would draw the fruit. And when you talk about public education, pensions, health care, and jobs, they are good for every Kentucky family. I believe we're tired of being divided. Bashir said it's a message that Eddie Chase fell in with for there. And, you know, again, oh boy, this is pathetic. Someone named Betty Bloomfield, C62, rushed to hear Blevins speak after her shift at a local McDonald's. She makes $7.25 an hour and strongly believes that national politicians need to create more work and jobs. But she says Blevin has her vote because it means a lot that she supports Trump. Now, this you can say very little about. I know Trump doesn't think before he speaks, but this is just Trump being Trump, Bloomfield said. And she gets her $7.25. This is from the Washington football team. Trent Williams is the player's name. He reveals he had cancer, blames the Washington team for not recognizing it sooner. This is by Les Carpenter on the 31st in the Washington Post. 2 days after ending his 5-month holdout, the Washington star left tackle Trent Williams sat hunched in a chair next to his locker at the team's practice field. His right foot tapped nervously. He was angry, he said, furious about that for 6 years team doctors had failed to take seriously a growth on his head that was diagnosed this winter as a rare form of cancer. I almost lost my life, he said. I would quit that team right away. Thursday was the first time the 31-year-old Williams has spoke publicly since the end of last season. He has instructed those close to him not to speak on his behalf in recent months, leaving only vague suggestions that he was unhappy with the medical diagnosis and had a medical scare. More than a medical scare. When he finally spoke, he told a far more serious story about cancer creeping inside his skull, and the fear that he might die opened an enormous rift between the Washington team's most respected player and the team's doctors and senior managers. That just shows that he was a slave that they didn't care about. The cancer, he said, called defibrinosia coma protuberans, or DFSP, is a soft tissue type cancer that develops in deep layers of the skin. He first noticed the growth in 2013 and said he asked the doctors about it, and at the time, in the ensuing years, as the growth continued to get bigger, each time he said he was told the growth was nothing to worry about. That's crazy. They should have did a biopsy. Only when the team finally grew more concerned with the growth this off-season and sent him to an affiliate medical hospital did the doctors seem to be a serious health issue. Williams then went to a hospital in Chicago where he was diagnosed with a cancerous tumor. In midwinter, he had surgery there to remove it. We literally caught it within a weeks of it metastasization through to my brain, to my skull, Williams said. He added the ordeal was a scary thing to go through and described being told by doctors to get his affairs in order in case he didn't make that one. Think how you describe that to your 9-year-old and your 5-year-old, that Daddy might not be here. This is why Williams was angry enough to hold out. He did not directly confirm suggestions made by friends and associates that he does not want to play for the Redskins again. He said not one from his team visited him during his 2 weeks stay in the hospital. He had flown to Chicago, not back. Oh, that's the team. Oh boy. Anyway, the team released a statement saying the team had requested the NFL Management Council convene a joint committee with the NFL Players Association to review the medical records and medical care given to Trent Williams as part of their collective bargaining agreement. The team continues to prioritize health and the well-being of our players. They lied. This is a very, very sad situation. Just before the NFL's 4 p.m. deadline, he returned to the team. Clear that he would not be dealt to another team, something he requested on the 1st of June. By reporting then, he could claim he fulfilled the obligation of his contract, which expires at the end of 2020. Williams failed a physical Wednesday morning when he was unable to comfortably fit a helmet on his head. He said he tried 2 helmets without any luck, adding that the surgeons had cut out 30% of his scalp to remove the tumor, and that pain remains from the 2 procedures to repair the wound. What wasn't repaired is his relationship with the NFL's only team, which he has played for 9 seasons. Williams spoke for 18 minutes. He wore a white cap on his head while he smiled several times. His foot was tapping there, and grew to the point that his whole body shook. I guess nobody took time to see what was going on there. He said, describing what he felt was the way team doctors handled the question he kept asking over the years about the growth on his head. This is a warning. If you have any type of growth, I mean, remember having some type of minor growth once, that it was a cyst many, many years ago, and he asked, and they said, well, they basically drained the fluid from it, and that was pretty much the end of that. Football was more important and to me it was more important too. I was told that it was something minor. Usually that's not the case if the thing got to be larger and larger. A lot of times people do have growths that do get larger and they are benign, but not in the case in where it was located. Williams also seemed frustrated with the fact that the team had not traded him. A person with knowledge of the situation said the team president, Bruce Allen, did not want to send the franchise top player to another team in response to his holdout. He already has lost a little more than half of his $10.25 million salary for this season and several signing bonuses. When you give them 48 hours to strike a deal, this probably isn't going to happen, said that. This is Allen. And the only thing he could say was next question when asked about the team owner, old Snyder. However, Williams said he still values his relationship and seems to separate the manager, Allen, from Snyder. It wasn't his fault. He's not down there in the training room. It's not on him. It's not on anyone. I have a very rare form of cancer, and my displeasure comes from how long it lingered. And that can happen. There's all kinds of things going on these days. Williams said, this is a national team, a large number of players go on injury reserve in recent seasons, and saw high-profile players as their quarterback, Alex Smith, Cody McCoy, and running back Demetrius Gansey underwent complicated recoveries from their injuries. However, Williams added he did not demand a new contract during his holdout, indicated that he's lost so much faith in the team that he wouldn't want to talk about negotiating the deal anymore. And that's, yeah, I can understand. Let's finish this up here. I felt weird, to say the least. He said it's something I didn't think I had to do. On Wednesday, he had to stand before some of the same doctors and say he does not respect them as examine him for his physical. The experience was not a pleasant one. His eyes grew cold as he recounted, and you could bet he did, in fact, feel very cold there. Let me just switch here. We're running late on Mr. Cook. Let me just check 1 minute here on our polling. We won't have time to do the polling, unfortunately, on this cast. I believe we did this particular polling on the week that was, and which means we will not have to redo it here. We'll just see what they are as a kind of we do have some Sunday polling up. This NBC News Wall Street Journal. This is the national race, the Democratic race. Biden is ahead by 4. He's at 27. Liz Warren is at 23, and Bernie Sanders is at 19, according to the Wall Street Journal, NBC. The little judge from South Bend is in the single digits at 6, and so is Kamala Harris. Yang is there. Amy Klobuchar has moved up to 5, so she's within 1 point of the little mayor. And then now we also have the Washington Post and ABC News poll. They have Biden up by 3. He's 28-23 with Warren. Bernie's at 17, and the little judge is at 9. Harris is at only 2, lower in that poll. And then we have a Fox News poll, which has Biden up by 10 at 31, Warren at 21, Bernie Sanders at 22, and Buttigieg again at 7, Harris at 3, Klobuchar at 2. So we have a number of polls here out on a Sunday, and let's look quickly at some matchups here. This is the NBC poll. Biden is ahead by 9 over DJ Trump, 50-41. The Fox News, he's ahead by 12. And Warren is ahead by 8. This is NBC's poll over DJ Trump, and Fox News has Warren ahead by 5. And Fox News, the trend has been out here. Bernie Sanders ahead by 8. DJ Trump, according to Fox News, is tied with the little judge. And the approval rating here is 45 for DJ Trump at NBC and 42 at Fox News. Congressional ballot, Democrats ahead by 7. So this is kind of the way things are here. Let me just contrast one other poll here. This is in Iowa. Warren is ahead by 3. Now this is an interesting poll. This is a New York Times poll, and the little judge is at 18, Biden is at 17, Bernie's ahead. In other words, it's basically statistically tied. Bernie at 19 in the New York Times poll. And Amy is at 4, Harris is at 3 there, and the approval rating, this was on Friday from ABC, Washington Post, DJ Trump's at 39, and the IDP poll, he's also at 39, so he is slipping some. The IDP poll is one of the polls that we look at here, and some of these right-wing polls like Harvard and Harvard Harris. I'm not sure how they got into this situation there, but you can tell it's all off. It has Joe Biden ahead by 15, and at 33 to 15 for Warren, 18 for Sanders, and 4 for the little judge from South Bend, 5 for Kamala Harris, and 3 Klobuchar. So all these are showing that Amy Klobuchar is coming up in the polls there. And with the ranking that I personally had, Bernie is first, then Liz Warren, and 3 used to be Beto O'Rourke. And now we put the moderate Amy Klobuchar in the place where Beto used to be. Strange situation there. We'll finish this up with Mr. Cook. We're kind of going over it a little bit. We'll do this one. I believe this is Amy Walter, but that's okay. We'll get Cook on the next, and we'll hit the highlights. How Democrats come back again. How Democrats come back again. This is by Charlie Cook on the 1st of November. For those political aficionados capable of prying themselves away from cable TV and web news, two quite interesting but very different books are out there. How the new America is dooming the Republic. This is by Stan Greenberg. Was published last month. Greenberg has been a one-person think tank for the Democratic Party, particularly the House Democrats, for the better part of 30 years. Anyone wondering what the GOP will look like 5 years after Trump leaves town would be advised to read it. We shall peruse it. Point betrays me here. As to whether this will happen in 2021 or 2025, the former ABC News director Mark Hempern's new book, this comeback attempt follows some very public allegations of unwanted sexual advances, comes in, released on Tuesday. How to beat Trump's America's top political strategies on what it will take is what you've read. If you found a big-time political journalist notebook of interviews with key Democratic operatives set in the metro in the back seat of Lyft in D.C. Hapron isn't taking sides, just canvassing some smart Democrats, and what they say. Hapron includes a bit of modern political history, particularly focusing on the last time Democrats were really in the wilderness. That was 1981 to 1992. When they escaped, it included an appropriate tribute to the late campaign strategist Paul Tully, who convinced the party in 1991 and 1992 of more importantly its donors for what they could win when Tully's tragic heart attack. I remember him in Little Rock, Arkansas, at the age of 48, while advising Clinton's campaign less than 2 months before his dream came true. Tully was one of the first people in either party to study and preach about the idea of data analytics, convincing skeptical donors that their money would not be wasted. Hapron then goes on to what went wrong with Democrats in 2016 and other recent defeats, how campaigns can avoid making the mistakes. The most chapter candidates' repudiation concerns defining your candidate before the opponent does. That's one of the primary things that a political has to do. Period. And control the narrative and work in social media and developing trust and relationships with the media. There are plenty of how-to and self-help sections that every Democratic Party official, operative, and activist should be well served to internalize. The chapter staying unified concerns how Democrats can diminish to the extent possible that splintering that eventually occurs in parties during a hot contest. Some of that has kind of disappeared. One part seems aimed at President Obama and the role he might play even before the party picks a nominee. There are some warnings about the Black Swan events, picking a running mate, running a convention, and preparing for debate. Some of particularly good advice from David Axelrod and the Raging Cajun James Carville out of Louisiana. Greenberg's diagnosis of what ails the Republican Party and its prognosis for the future is obviously very negative, with plenty of broadsides against Trump and the GOP. But whether you're a Democrat who relishes every bit of it, or a Republican who winces all the way through, he backs up his arguments with a ton of polling demographic activity that looks for me, to those who regularly see memos from Democracy Corps, that is a 20-year project of Greenberg and Carville. Greenberg begins a discussion of New America, what's changing demographics and voting behavior of our country, and what it means for the GOP. He discusses the rise of the Tea Party movement and how it morphed into DJ Trump's movement and party polarization, a look at the current composition of the Republican Party based on his polling, and extensively examines how the immigration issue and identity politics played into Trump's rise and how Democrats might play forward. Greenberg attempts to illuminate what the GOP might look like a decade from now. The question is worth asking every Republican post and strategist, because no one seems to have a clear idea of how former Republican Chair Tom Davis, who represents much of Fairfax, Virginia, as it is transitioning from Democrat to Republican, has observed that the Republican Party has gone from the country clubs to just the country. Well, there's no doubt about that. I remember it very clear. Saltonstall and people of that nature who represent. There are free centers of the GOP, small town and rural voters, Europeans without college degrees, European evangelicals would seem to be crowding out the additional profile of suburbia. Upscale Republicans who belong to more mainstream Protestant or Catholic churches. This is an issue that we'll be hearing lots about over the next few years, and I think it's will partially affect by who Democrats nominate for president the next few years. Charlie Cook there. And we can't forget Mr. Cook. This will do it for us. We'll have special programming on the life of John Conyers Jr., and we'll also have the Bernie Sanders special, the World Series special on it's all about sports. We'll get that done. And we'll have a Numbers Man presentation. This is Boston Red on the 4th of November in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth, our former partner Jerry Pippin. We'll be bringing Jerry back also. This is, incidentally, started on Friday, the enrollment period for the Affordable Care Act, and the various outlets or exchanges around the nation. Some states do have their own exchanges, or the National Exchange. Do go there to check out the various insurance opportunities, as we'll call them. There is a mechanism there to rate those policies. Now, in some states, there are additional policies, so do check with your state, but check the national to see what is there. And remember, don't buy the skinny policies. Those are very cheap policies, but they provide very little if you have an emergency, even in appendicitis. Anyway, those are some of the things to watch. We'll try to get some special polling out on the election tomorrow in Kentucky and in Mississippi. We can find any recent polling to bring to you.